So much of the learning that we've been doing is about that sense about, obviously, it connects to tefillah as much as it does to ta'anit. And just yesterday, and I want to say a little bit about it, there was this whole theme that sort of plays out throughout the Masechet about the Yachid and Tzibur, that at an earlier stage, the Yachidim are mitanim, and the Mishnah even before it spoke about the sense of when you start out saying praying for rain, according to Rabbi Gamliel, you start on the 7th of Mar Cheshvan, not because he denies that the 3rd of Mar Cheshvan might be the most ideal time, but Akadesh Yagia Achron B'Yisrael and Har Prat. So again, it's an interesting inverse of the Yachid and Tzibur relationship, that the Tzibur there waits to pray for rain, even if maybe they need it a little bit earlier because of their concern of even the few individual stragglers and their responsibility towards those. So that's a major theme here of this Masechet. And I did want to say, that in the last few days I've been sort of like, as I tend to, just sort of barreling headlong, thank you, when we begin the daf, but I really should have and need to, and we will be taking out just a moment, to obviously be mishtateif in the tsar and in the of the chatufim and the 3 teenage boys that are kidnapped. I actually have a personal connection because my sister, who lives in Israel, lives in Tel Mon, and one of the boys was from Tel Mon, and 2 of the boys, one of them from Tel Mon and one of the others, goes to the same high school that my nephew goes to. Really all of our learning and our tefillot should be for their well-being, and that they should be able to come back safely to their families. And we will dedicate, the learning of our daf for that. There's just read a tefillah here. You know what? Actually, maybe we'll read the tefillah at the end of the learning. Can you send that to me? Okay. So, all right. So, I do want to say that bring out 1 or 2 themes from yesterday before we resume today, which begins at the beginning of Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph. But I want to bring out some important themes that we will be seeing. One was again this issue that I just said of the Yachid and the Tzibur. On the one hand, you wait to begin praying for rain the way we paskin until even some individuals get all the way back, that responsibility towards the Yechidim. But then the flip of it, which is the next Mishnah, which is that the Yechidim begin to pray before the community sort of has it's got to such a crisis level yet that the community is not praying, but the Yechidim are. And this issue of who is the Yechidim is an important question, because again, it's this idea of the this dynamic and who's responsible for whom and so on. So the Gemara says that the Yechidim are Rabbanan, the Torah sages, although that's a little bit funny why the Torah sages are being put in this position. And if you think about it, we have a particular Yachid that really comes to the surface a lot in this Masechet, really grabs the imagination, which is Choni HaMe'agel, right? The one who's like draws a circle, and somebody who has like this very intimate relationship with God, almost like sort of like the charismatic, individual, as opposed to the more institutionalized leadership. But certainly it has nothing to do with being a Torah scholar. He's not Rabbi Choni, he's Choni HaMe'agel. And when the Gemara later talks about who are the Yechidim, it contrasts in a way Yechidim to the Talmidim. The Talmidim are those that are no Torah, that maybe are they're not again rabbis yet, they're Torah students, but they are maybe, if they want to act as Yechidim, they may, and maybe they're encouraged to, and so on. And we had the whole discussion yesterday about URL. Would it be a type of religious arrogance for them to be acting in that role? On the other hand, they're making themselves fast, and it's challenging for them. But the real Yechidim that were identified were who? The Gemara says, Kol haro'elim noto parnas al hatzibur. Somebody who's fit to be a leader. Parnas is like a lay leader of the community. By the way, the word parnas lefarnes is to provide sustenance, right? So it's about that sort of sense of responsibility for the well-being of the community, and that's a very different model. Like, it doesn't just mean somebody who's enough of a Torah scholar to be that. Maybe it has nothing to do with Torah scholar at all. For example, like if you said, well, who's going to be the next president of our shows? Well, let's draw up a short list. Okay, so probably the people you put on that short list, Roy Limnoto Parnas Al Tzibur, are people that in general, even before they're in that position, are people that assume assume responsibility for the community, have the capacity, and in general are people that are concerned for the well-being and commit themselves to the well-being of the community. And that's a very different type of a model, of an idea. And those are the yichidim, the people that even before things have hit the crisis level, already see it as their responsibility to do, to put themselves out and to take steps for the sake of the well-being of the community. So that seems to be more the sense of who the yichidim are, and the fact that the Torah scholar or the Torah students can aspire to that, I think does sort of speak about this sort of, tension or this parallel track of Torah leadership and lay leadership. And the rabbis sort of, would like to see themselves as the leaders of the community, but they're also acknowledge that there is such a thing as lay leadership as well. But it's not really here about, you're a big Talmud Chacham, that makes you, a holier person and somebody that should be the yichidim. There really is here this question also about responsibility, and I think that, and sort of communal leadership, and that's part of this sort of ongoing issue here of Yachid and Tzibur. Yes?
Is there an implication here of major donors?
Money? I don't see that. Like Roy Linoto Parnas means somebody that has that's like has money, and therefore you would make him want to. I know in contemporary, usage, I don't think so. I don't think in the Gemara you have that sense of like a major donor. At least, yeah. It's interesting when that sense comes up, but I don't think so. So anyway, so that's like I think one important theme that comes up here that we'll see again. We'll see a number of times. The other thing that I did want to say about this, by the way, was the issue just very briefly, because we have to actually start the daf, but I can't resist because it was on Shabbos and I wasn't here, so I wanted to touch on it, was when you start saying Tein Tol Matar in Bavel. So the Gemara says 60 days after the Tekufa. Now you should know, by the way, that the Tekufot are basically mapped to the equinoxes and the that work? The equinoxes and the solstice. So just a little quick sort of. So you've got the vernal, which is spring, equinox, and autumnal, which is fall, equinox. Okay, and that's when the days are exactly 12 hours of dark and 12 hours of sunlight, measured from sunrise to sunset. And then you have the winter solstice, which is the shortest day of the year, the shortest amount of sunlight, and the summer solstice, which is the longest day.
Most yesterday?
What?
Yeah.
So these are all basically on the 21st, okay? So this is September 21st, December 21st, March 21st, and June 21st. So we had that yesterday?
Yes.
Okay, there you go. Okay, anyway, so these are also called in Chazal the Tekufot, okay? So this is Tekufat Tishrei, right? And this is Tekufat Nisan, and I don't know if they do they call these the Tekufot? They do, yeah. It's Tekufat Tevet, right?
No, that one's Tevet.
I'm sorry, thank you. Tekufat Tevet, right, and Tekufat Tammuz, right? Okay, so those are also called the Tekufot. So the Gemara says that you start praying for rain in Bavel 60 days after the Tekufa. Obviously, we're talking about Sukkot and so on. So we're talking about Tekufat Tishrei, and you start praying 60 days after. That's when they start needing rain in Bavel. So 60 days after September 21st gets you approximately November 21st. You look at your siddur. When does your siddur say?
November 20th.
20th, whatever. Right, all right. I didn't do the exact math. Give or take, whatever. Fine. I was rough.
Now they say
Anyway.
December 5th or 6th.
So you take a look at your siddur.
Yeah.
Right? No, it's like the night of the 4th, right?
That's how old your city is.
Exactly. Well, if it's really old, if it's back before 1900. So this, I'll tell you. So anyway, right? So the siddur says, right? What does the siddur say? It says, right. It says through Mincha December 4th or 5th or 5th in civil year. But anyway, you start saying it December 5th or the night before. How do you get from November 20th to December 5th? And the answer is
Julian calendar.
exactly. This is November 20th. Chazal, we're dealing with the Julian calendar. So we actually do observe it on. We do switch it on, do it on November 20th. Except we're doing November 20th Julian, which happens to fall out on December 5th, Gregorian. So therefore, we are keeping not only the date, but we're keeping the date according to the old Julian calendar. Now, just again, for a very brief, very brief explanation, Julian calendar did know that there were 365 and a quarter days of a year. So they actually had the regular leap year, etc., once every 4 years. The only problem is that it actually is a little bit less than 365 days a year. And actually, our calendar is different. The Gregorian calendar is different than the Julian calendar by 3 days every 400 years. Okay, every three times every 400 years, it does not have a leap year when the Julian calendar does have a leap year. Basically, any year divisible by 100, any exact century, although it's divisible by 4, it should have a leap year. It does not have a leap year in the Gregorian calendar unless it's divisible by 400. Okay, so that's how you get 3 day shift every 400 years. And big deal, 3 days every 400 years. But enough millennia and it eventually adds up. So by the time Gregory came onto the scene, the fact that the Julian calendar had extra leap years when it shouldn't have, his November 20th, right, was what it really should have been. Now it's when I start getting confused. Anyway, it should have been fewer leap days, which would have put the actual date much later. So he had to add 11 days.
So Hillel's calendar is based on the Julian calendar?
Well, no, Hillel's calendar you mean about the adjustments, right. Shouldn't Hillel have had to have more adjustments in order to keep things more in sync? And the answer is yes. Okay, so eventually Pesach will stop being in the spring, I guess, given enough time. So every 100 years or so, this calendar gets the divergence increases, except on a year divisible by 400. So in the year 2000, it did not continue to diverge. So that's why actually it remained December 5th between pre-2000 and post-2000. But in 2000 and 2100, we'll start saying it's December 6th because the years continue to do what?
Let's all remember that.
Let's all keep that in mind. God willing, right? We should all live that long. Anyway, so that's how we get to saying it's December. That's how come it's not only linked to an English date, but the date moves. It's because it's tracking the Julian date. So obviously that's very bizarre that we keep on, since when do we enshrine an English date? It's one thing to enshrine something based on a reality of where the sun is and the seasons and the Tukufot, but that's not actually a secular date. So why don't we just, adjust it and fine, we'll compute it based on what we really know the Tukufot are, and now start saying November 20th, not December 5th. So that's a really good question, which I don't have an answer. I have no good explanation. How come we've enshrined the date as opposed to the days from the Tkufa? And the other thing I do want to point out about this, once we're talking about this, and then we'll move on, is a point that the Rosh is a famous tshuva of the Rosh. The Rosh comes to his shpeller in Toledo. That's where he was in Spain, right? Toledo? Yeah. So anyway, and he sees that everybody there it's this period between Sukkot and 60 days of the Tkufa. You haven't started saying Tein Telamatra yet, but they need rain, and it hasn't been raining. And everybody there is engaged in special tefillot for rain and ta'aniyot for rain. They're doing everything it says in this Masechet because they need rain, and it's not raining. But guess what they're not doing? They're not saying Tein Telamatra because it's not yet 60 days after the Tkufa. And he says, I could not believe it, because the Gemara doesn't say, it's not like this thing, the Bavli paskins one way, the Yerushalmi paskins another, we paskin like the Bavli, because the Bavli is the more authoritative text. So it's not about that. It's about the fact that in Bavel they needed rain at a different time than they needed in Eretz Yisrael. So it says, here in Spain, we need time different than we need in Bavel. We need more like we need in Eretz Yisrael. We need rain earlier. And it's not just this year is a unusual year. Every single year, we need rain, much, much earlier than 60 days before the Tkufa. So he says, paskin for them, that you don't say it 60 days after the Tkufa. You say it whenever the date is, in this land, in this country, when you generally start needing rain. And then he says, and I was soveach kikruchia v'leista mishkachti. I was screeching like a crane, and nobody paid attention to me. So this is very comforting to know that, if a rabbi ever has a hard time persuading the community about something, you're in good company. Here, it was in the their own best interest. Logically, the halacha was that way, but they were like, and it was somebody of the stature of the Rosh, and they refused to listen. What does he know? This is what we've always been doing. So they're going to do their taniyot for rain, but they're not going to say tein talamata.
So that
The only remnant of this, and la halacha, sadly, whatever, ironically, the community won out. We do not paskin like the Rosh. The only echo we have of the Rosh's position, which is completely the logical one, is if you're living in a country which needs rain earlier than 60 days after the Tekufa, so you don't say Tein Talamatar, but if accidentally you forgot and by accident said Tein Talamatar, then you don't have to go back. So that's a degree to which we paskin like the Rosh, yes.
So that would seem to apply here, where we need rain in eastern North America, we need rain all the time.
Uh-huh.
And when we go 2 weeks without rain, people go panicky here.
Uh-huh.
It's not like Eretz Israel,
right,
where you can go months without rain and it's not a big, in summer it's not a big deal.
Interesting,
so
right.
It's
very strange. And I should just say, let me just end this and then we'll continue with the Gemara, that what this does bring up, one of the powerful things about this Masechet is the sense of, as we've been talking about, rain as demonstrating God's relationship to the land, God's closeness, God's answering us. So it doesn't start raining. It's almost like Masechet says, you start praying for rain on Zayin Mar Cheshvan. If it hasn't rained by Yud Zayin, here's what you have to do. It's like, right, but also like, why haven't God answered us yet? So we've got to start doing something. But there's this sense that you're davening and you're expecting a response to the assumption of the efficaciousness of 10 days, right? Here, it's like, why do we say Tein Talmatar? Because that's what it says in the Siddur. That's what it says in the Mishnah Berurah, So there's just this sense of like, okay, this is the liturgy, this is what you say, and so on. And that is really, I think, like, exacerbated or typified by this thing I just said. Like here, the Rosh says we totally need rain earlier, and it's like, but what does that have to do with what we actually say in the Shemona Esrei? Which it says you say it December 5th. That's when we say it. Like regardless of what actually. So the issue about how we shift from a tefillah and the sense of the responsiveness and our belief in sort of God's responsiveness and the way in which this is connected to things that are happening, as opposed to making it like a fixed liturgy. You really, that's a shift that you really see happening. Yes.
I think we don't appreciate the difference in living in a Mediterranean climate such as Spain or Israel or California to here. I remember the first time I went to Los Angeles, it rained the night before. It was mid-September. The previous rain had been in February.
Wow.
It is a really big deal, and we don't appreciate how the importance of this.
Interesting.
Let's
Thank you.
acknowledge that in Babel, you really didn't need much rain. Right?
It was irrigated.
Right. Exactly. So maybe that's also how it starts becoming a little bit more of liturgy because of that. Okay.
Also,
So
now we have a different understanding of ecosystems. Like if it doesn't rain in the winter in California, there's no snow. Or if it doesn't snow,
right.
There's no melt in the spring. And
right.
That's when you have the source. But
so it's more about the snow in the winter, right? Interesting.
Again, that's an irrigated agriculture system.
All right, so let's now take a look. Now, so the last thing I'll say, then getting back to the theme of Yachid and Tzibur, and this we'll pick up with, is the issue that the Gemara said, and this is what we're going to be continuing right now, is about, the Gemara talked about eating in a time of famine and so on, and this whole sort of playoff from Bnei Yosef. So let's take a look, because this will now continue. We'll continue in that theme, but we'll continue in this theme of the Yachid and the Tzibur. So we pick up with what? Achei Yosef, excuse me. 3 lines from the top on Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Kol Hamar Ivatzmo b'Shnei Re'avon. Anybody who also causes himself to go hungry in a time of famine. Maybe you have food, but you don't want to. Obviously, it doesn't mean you starved yourself literally, but you do not. But you only eat sparingly because you want to identify with the share in the suffering of the community. Nitzami mitam mishuneh is saved from an unusual death, meaning not like an unnatural death. Shenemar b'Rav padcha mimaves. In famine, God has redeemed you from death. Birav, it says, Mirav mi baile. He has redeemed you from famine. This is what it says. In the merit that somebody is causing himself to go hungry in a time of famine, is saved from an unnatural death. So now again, and here is again this theme that here you are as a yachid, you could separate yourself from what the suffering of the community, but you choose rather to not just emotionally, but even in your actions, act in a way that really places you within the within the tragedy, within the suffering of the community. So again, that yachid tzibur relationship is really being focused on here. Amar Ish Lakish, Asur Ladam, and now we're going to continue with that. Asur Ladam l'shamesh mitato b'shnei re'avon. It's not only about food. A person should not be having sex during the times of famine. Shene'emar li'yosef yad shnei banim b'terem tavo shnat hara'av. He had two children before the period of famine came, but once the period of famine came, he was no longer. Now, does that mean it's general, sort of like we said before? Obviously you could see a parallel here, like the Mishnah. There's Taanit, which is Mar'iv Atzmo. There's Asur B'Tashmish HaMitah. So here, not having sex, so it's just a way of sort of sense of denying oneself certain pleasures, but also could be, that bringing more children into the world and more mouths to feed and is also sort of seen as sort of disregarding the suffering that, and what is happening around you. Those that are deprived of children, meaning people that have not yet have children, are allowed to have sex during this period. Tanu Rabbanan. So again, what?
Isn't that sort of upending we just said?
No, but again, I think that's interesting in terms of that issue of balancing Yachid and Tzibur. There's an idea of identifying with the Tzibur and so on, but then there's also, particular, profound personal needs sometimes that need to be addressed. So I think that there is that question of how to exactly strike that balance. What did you want to say about that?
So it's about the Tanu, because it's not about the Yeluda. It's about also the Yeluda, because the Yeluda is also taking money. Children are also, but there are exceptions.
Right.
כל העניין של המיניות הוא גם העניין של ההנאה וגם העניין של הילודה, וזה מאוד מסובך כל העניין הזה, אז הם נכנסים כאן לאיזשהם...
Right, so thank you, but what?
It's only if you can do them?
I don't know, it's a good question, but so I think you're right, but I don't think that it means that the issue of pleasure and children are intertwined. I don't think it just means that the only problem of having sex is that of pleasure. Maybe you're right. I think it could also be just, bringing more children into the world at a time like this. But what I think is that sometimes you can't always be worried about, the world's problems. If you've also got, your personal profound problems that sometimes have to override. So that's sort of the way I read it, is again trying to figure out this balance between the individual and the tzibur.
Rashi seems to say it's more of a technical thing, because if you have a mitzvah of Kriya Beribia that you haven't
right, it's just
yet, maybe it's
it's just a technical mitzvah aspect. That you could frame it that way as well. Okay, so the Marx continues like this. Okay. Tanu Rabbanan, Bisman Yisrael Shuyim B'Tza'ar, Upirish Echad Mehem and one of them separates himself from the community and is not Mishtatef B'Tza'ar. But in Shnei Malachei HaSharet Shemalavin Lo LeAdam U'Menichin Lo Yidehem HaRosho. So the two heavenly angels that accompany a person come, and you thought it was only on Shabbat, but actually according to other Gemarot, it's actually the whole time. There's actually a little tefillah you're supposed to say when you go into the bathroom to tell the angels to wait outside when you have to go to the bathroom. I'm serious. Anyway, and they come and they put their hands on your head, the omrim, and they say to this person's head, and they say, "Ploni zeh shepiresh min hatzibur, al yira'eh b'nechmat hatzibur." This person that separates himself, he should not see in the consolation of the community. Which is, by the way, quite fascinating, because that's in a way a whole theme about the beginning of Megillat Ruth. Thinking about it, they were literally poresh min hatzibur when it has time, and then they come back. And anyway, so all right, Tanya Ida, we talked another price. Bisman shetzibur sharui b'tza'ar, al yomar adam. So what do I care? They're suffering. I'll just go and I have enough money and resources. I'll take care of myself. Herod bakar u'shchotzon. Here you are, you're rejoicing, you're slaughtering sheep and cattle. Echol basar shtot yayin, eating meat and drinking wine. Echol v'shato ki machar namut, eat and drink because for tomorrow we will die. You thought that was just Epicurus. So Maksiv Batre. So this is a guy who's doing. He's just indulging himself in pleasures. What does it say afterwards? This will be revealed to the ears of God. This sin will not be atoned for you until you die. So therefore, this is a very terrible sin. The whole point about Porish Atzmo Midarchei Hatzibor is listed amongst those like Ein Lo Chelek Olam Haba, that whole sense of sort of identifying, with the community. I mean, one should even point out as well, in terms of the whole question of, punishment and Olam Haba and those types of questions, that the pshat of the idea of somebody getting karet, means separated from the community, right? So you are nichrat me'amav, you are cut off from your community. So that whole sense of sort of the ultimate punishment in a way is this, meaning, is about this question about being part of or cut off from the community. So it's not surprising that, Chazal sort of translated in terms of Olam Haba, yes.
I was going to say we just made a shift, because we started out by saying that it's a good thing that you do, like you're mitzvah mishuneh. Now we're saying it's a bad thing if you don't.
Right.
It's seeing more of an imperative on you.
Right, although there it was actually called starving yourself. Here it's you're actually going and indulging yourself. You're completely sealing yourself off. You're completely disregarding it. But it's a good point, the shift of the, of the censure here.
Well, Gemara is actually about to cover that also.
Right, okay, right. Well, now we're going to get even worse. It says, Ad kan midas beinonim. That's only average people. Avav, meaning you're average bad. Avav b'midat rishayim or whatever. Wicked people, Maksiv, it says, so let's go and take wine and get drunk with mead, and it'll be like this tomorrow. Now, how is it really different is not so clear. Rashi says the difference is that earlier it said machar namut, that a person really is afraid that they'll die, as opposed to let's just live it up, reading that more literally, that you're really afraid. So you're doing it out of fear that you'll die. That's one thing. Here, the guy just wants to party all the time, and there's no sense of a fear that he'll die. That's even more of a rasha. Matsiv Basrei, what does it say after that? Hatzadik avad ve'ein ish sam al lev. The righteous is lost, and nobody's paying attention because of the evil that the righteous have been taken away. So this person's sins cause even the righteous in the community to die. And Rashi sort of says it means, and therefore that the tzaddikim won't be available to pray for the community. So that's also interesting again about that, I would say, that yachid idea, that here's the tzaddik, the yachid that could come to the defense of the community, and because of the way this individual is separating himself from the community, he impacts those special individuals that could help the community. Ella, rather, Yitzaer Adam Atzmo Adam Imatzibur Shekei Matzinu b'Moshe Rabbeinu. You should participate with the afflictions of the community. For such is what we find by Moshe. Shetzir Atzmo Imatzibur Shene'emar Videi Moshe Kvedim V'Yichu Evan V'Yasimu Tachtav V'Yoshev Aleh. Moshe, they took a rock for him to sit on during this war against Amalek. V'chilo hayalo l'Moshe karo keset. Well, Moshe didn't have a pillow or a blanket. He needed to get a rock. Achas leishiv aleha ela kachamar Moshe. Moshe said, "Hov Yisrael shuim b'tzar." Since the Jewish people or Israel is in pain and suffering, they're going to war. Afani imahem b'tzar. Even I will be with them, and I will participate in their suffering. So you don't just stay at home and watch on TV in your nice, comfortable living room. You actually find ways to identify and participate with this suffering. Again, v'chol hamitzaer atzmo im hatzibur, and one who does this zochev ro'eh b'nechmat hatzibur will ultimately see the consolation of the community. V'shema yomar adam mi mekifi. Who will testify if I go ahead and I do this in private? Nobody will know, meaning I can publicly appear to participate in what the community is doing. This also raises that interesting question, right? What does it mean to be part of the community? Is it just in the obvious, visible ways? Or is it here even in terms of, sort of your own sort of emotional, internal, private ways? So here, when I go out with the community, I'll daven with them, I'll participate with them, even if personally I'm not really feeling anything, and when I go home, I'll do my own thing. Who's going to testify otherwise? So the Gemara says, Beiso shel Adam b'kirot beito shel Adam b'idim bo. Avnei beito, the rocks and the beams of his house will testify against him. Shene'emar, ki even mekir tizak, the rock will call out from the wall. The kapis, me'etz ya'anen, what? Kapis is a kapis me'etz ya'anena. The kapis, which is like the pieces of Rashi says like the stones that you would put in between the wood, to sort of give it stability. That will answer against him. So what you sort of think is taking place in your house and private and nobody sees, you will somehow be made. It will be brought into the public sphere. The very house, which just sort of signifies the privacy in which you're trying to separate yourself out, you'll be somehow shamed publicly. So. But again, the important point here is, the idea that it's not just about your public behavior, which is significant here. Today, Rabbi Shila Amri, Shnei Malachei Hasharet Hamalavin Lo Ladam, Heim Idin Olav. Back to the two heavenly angels, they testify against you. Shne'emar Ki Malachav Yitzav. God will command His angels against you. I don't know what to sort of read into the whole focus on the angels here, there should be something more to be said about this. Why all of a sudden we're finding the angels are the ones that kick you out, and the angels are the ones that announce it. I don't really have something profound to say about that. Rabbi Chidkiah Omer Nishmato Shel Adam Hi Mi'ida Alav. Your very soul testifies against you, which is sort of like your sinning is really between or you're separating yourself out. Is that your sort of interior emotional plane or your private plane? But ultimately that will speak against you. Shne'emar Mishochevet from that lies down in your bosom, you should, which is normally interpreted as your spouse, you should watch what your mouth says. So what? I'm sorry?
I'm joking and saying that Sterling, the basketball person.
Oh, there you go. Exactly. Okay, right. So the Yeshomrim Adam who he mi'ida Allah. Excuse me, did I just skip a line? The Yeshomrim Evarav Shel Adam mi'idim bo. Your very limbs. Shne'emar Atem Edai Ne'um Hashem. You are my witnesses, says God. I don't, from the context of that pasuk, I'm not exactly sure how it knows that it means the limbs, but okay.
Plural.
Yeah, it is plural. I didn't check it, but there's another Ateme Dai which I know, which is about Avodah Zarah and so on, which I didn't remember to be about the limbs of a person. Anyway, so I think this is interesting about your very soul. Like, is this basically saying that these things impact your, neshama? Meaning, are they trying to say that you think you're doing it in private, but ultimately, you think all the things you're doing, nobody knows about. Ultimately, they'll become public. People do find out about these things, and they do become publicized. That would sort of be the very house will call out. Or maybe it's saying, maybe they don't become public, but it eats away at your neshama, or it affects, your very person. I think that there could be something being said here other than just some miraculous way in which it will be, but trying to reflect, what actually, it will be the consequence. What did you want to say, Seth?
I think it also says something about creating a gap between oneself and one's essence or being or something,
So
sin creates that gap between who you are and your neshama, your
right.
essence.
I was going to make a very good point that your Ivarim are the ones that you're indulging in by all this physical pleasure.
Right.
So I'm saying it's
you mean the fact that you're looking so nice and healthy testifies to what you've been doing, right?
No, but also it's a shift from the physical manifestation of it to the more spiritual impact.
Right.
So it goes when that neshama or the malachim, it affects the external.
Right.
I think
Okay, nice. Where's the puzzle here, Charlie?
43:10.
Yeah, I don't see where it's about
It
limbs.
doesn't look like limbs.
Yeah.
At least in shot.
Yeah, it is about the Avodah Zarah. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, anyway. All right, so now... What? Yeah, okay. All right, so now let's continue. So the Gemara says like this. Elamunah vein Avel. This is from Devarim, from Hazinu. A God of trustworthiness. There is no perversion. Elamunah kashem shenifraim or sheim lo'olam haba afilu al avera kala she'osim. The same way the wicked get punished in the world to come, even on a small sin. Therefore, the righteous get punished even for a small sin in this world. Right? This is Chazal's attempt, also, which is very obviously important thing to address in Masechet Taanit, and it gets touched on multiple times, which is the whole sense of theodicy and a reward and punishment. Right? The Psukim say you do the mitzvot, you don't do the mitzvot, so you get driven from the land. But it doesn't always exactly work out that way. way, right? And one of the things, by the way, that I've been pointing out is that Taanit, I think, is it's noteworthy that in Taanit, it's not like the response to lack of rain is, oh, we sinned, let's do tshuva. Meaning there is tshuva mentioned a little bit when it talks about the public sort of Taanit, but mostly it's God isn't giving us rain, let's call out to God. And, Taanit is a way of intensifying that calling out to God. So in a way, some of that whole question of theodicy actually is not as central as you might think. It's not necessarily linked to sin and so on in the normal way, and about sin and tshuva and so on. It's about the relationship. And if God is giving us rain, we have to really work at restoring that relationship. But nevertheless, it is an issue that does come up, and Chazal are always worried because, or pay attention to the fact that it empirically doesn't work that way, that the righteous, do well and the wicked suffer. And the basic way that the Chazal deal with it is, ascribing most of the accounting to Olam Haba. And so in Olam Haba, it all get equal. Okay, fine, it get equal, but why is it unequal still in this world? Well, because the Rishonim are doing well, because they're getting rewarded for all of their tiny little mitzvot. Don't worry, that's a way of clearing the ledger so they can get fully paid up for their Averos in Olam Haba. And Tzadikim are having it bad because they're getting paid up for their Averos here, so that they'll be able to get totally rewarded in Olam Haba. Okay, so that's this idea of El Emunah. There's no perversion. The same way they'll get their reward in the world to come, the righteous, even the tiny mitzvah. That's why the Rishonim get rewarded even for the small mitzvot. Shosim. Sadiq v'yasharhu, God is righteous and upright. So what does that mean? Amru, or they take it Amru. Lamed shebeshat ptirato shel adam, at the time that a person passes away, lebeit olamo, to his eternal rest. Kol ma'asav. Now it's not niftarim, which you could understand where it says because ptirato, but it's nifratim from the word prat, are enumerated lifanav. The omrimlo, and the angels say to him, Kash v'chakasita, look, here's what you did, b'makom ploni, b'yom ploni, and this place, and this place at this time, v'hu omer hein, and he has to admit to it. The omrimlo, and they say to him, sign here that you admit that you've done all these things in your life. V'chotein, and he signs, shenemar biyad kol adam yachtom, in every person's handwriting he will sign. Not only does he admit that he's done all these things, Ella shematzdik alav et hadin, he accepts the justice of the judgment against him. Va'omer lahem yafet dantuni, you've judged me properly. L'kayim hashenemar l'man titzdak bidvarecha, you God are found righteous in your words. It's a pretty scary idea, right? Like when you die, they're going to play you back the movie of your whole life, where everything you did in private, everything in public, and you're going to have to admit to all of it. So presumably, what that is doing here is it's echoing back the idea of Evarav shel Adam, Nishmato shel Adam. In the end, you yourself will have to testify against yourself about everything that you have done wrong. But now, obviously, we're generalizing it, and it's not just about Paresh Min HaTzibur. So it says, Amar Shmuel, Kol Yoshev Okay, so now that was the end of that whole fascinating thing. But again, the major theme there is about Paresh Min HaTzibur and being mishtateif in the tsa'ar of the tzibur. Again, something which is a larger theme here of Yachid and Tzibur, and also, sadly, very relevant now, of course, with all the things that are going on for the Chatufim, and it's easy to not, but the imperative, of course, to really identify and be mishtateif. So the Gemara now continues and says, Amar Shmuel. So now we get back to the issues of fasting. Kol Yoshev, but again, this is going to be a little bit surprising given this whole Masechet. Let's see what Shmuel says. Kol Yoshev b'Taanit nikra chotei. Anybody who sits in a fast is called a sinner. Okay, we just got through the whole idea. The whole Masechet is about fasting, but you're considered a sinner.
Other times.
Well, we'll talk about that, but let's read what it says. Savar ki hai Tana detani. He holds like the following Tana that we taught. Rabbi Elazar hakafar b'Rebbe Omer. Ma tamud lomar v'chiper alav me'asher chata al hanafesh. This is by the Nazir. You atone for him for that he sinned on the soul. Now the pshat in the psukim is, first of all, this is only the sin offering that a Nazir brings when he becomes tamei because he encountered a dead body. And al hanafesh means for the dead body in which he encountered. But that's not the way the Gemara is reading this. With what soul did this person sin? He sinned against his own soul, that he deprived himself from wine. You can make a kavachomer. This person that only afflicted himself from withholding wine is called the sinner. How much more so is somebody who withholds himself from all things. Now, by the way, I do want to say a parenthetical point here that somebody pointed out to me, which I like was so true, and I realized it. It's because of like a Gemara like this, that we identify the Nazir with like asceticism, and it's about tziyar atzmon, it's about denying a pleasure. But if but it's not so clear that the issue about wine is about the pleasure of wine. It's about the fact that wine, intoxicates and makes you like lose your ability to necessarily like think clearly and think, so it's not necessarily the pleasure aspect. I mean, it's not that the Nazir denies all pleasure. He doesn't deny meat. Like normally you think about basar v'yayin. Right, so it's only yayin, and I think that there's an importance not to let the Gemara reframe that the Nazir is about asceticism. But nevertheless, that's the way it's being read, and saying that here he's a sinner for becoming an ascetic just about wine. How much more so somebody that denies himself all things? Let's just read a little bit more, and the Gemara says like this. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Nikra Kadosh. So as opposed to Rabbi Eliezer Hakafar, Rabbi Eliezer says he's called holy. Holy he will be, the growing of the wildness of the hair of his head. This person that only denied himself one thing, which more so somebody who afflicts himself from all things. Shmuel ha'ikri kadosh. What does Shmuel do with the fact that he's called holy? So Gemara says, Hahu agidu parakai. That means the hair is holy, that he's not allowed to shave the hair. But it doesn't mean that he as a person is holy for adopting this practice. Rabbi Linzer, isn't he called a sinner? No. Hahu desoiv nafshe. That just means that he became tameh. The simple sense of the pasuk, not he's a sinner for being a nazir. Now, it's interesting to note, of course, that this issue about is asceticism a positive religious practice, is not something that goes away. I mean, Ramban, on the psukim says, and probably is shot of the psukim, that that the nazir, the reason he brings a sin offering at the end of the process. Here, talking about the sin offering he would bring if he became tameh, but it's because, ideally he should have remained a nazir his whole life, and that's like it's a sin to stop being a Nazir. Again, although whereas Rambam famously quotes this Gemara, Rambam in Shmona Prakim, and he quotes a Yerushalmi, which even makes the point stronger. And the Yerushalmi says, "Isn't it not enough for you, that you have to go and make more things forbidden for you?" That the whole idea, Rambam says that this is like a sickness that people have got, this idea of asceticism as a religious practice from basically from the Christians, and that the Torah just wants you to have moderation, the Rambam's golden mean, and control, not be led after your lusts, but the idea of self-denial as a religious practice, Rambam says is a complete perversion. So obviously there have been various strands within Judaism about this, but the point I want to make in this context is that Michael's question, which is, in what context are we talking about doing the Taanit, right? Is it about the idea of, would Shmuel say, well, when you have to do a Taanit because there's no rain, yeah, you got to do it, but everybody's considered a chote. Presumably not, right? Presumably it's one thing when you're doing this, because as I said, as a way of intensifying tefillah, calling out to God, it's sort of part of this, part of the reaching out to God, that's where it's appropriate. But if it's done as a religious practice in itself, that by separating myself from the world, this is something that's going to make me holy, that's where Shmuel says, no, actually lodges, that's the Nazir, right? It's not like a sense of this urgency to call out to God and so on. No, I'm holy, and not only, and the thing I should mention, because again of the theme of Yachid and Tzibur, not only is, I would argue, is the problem that is self-denial and separating from the world a positive religious value or not, but also if you think about the model of the Nazir, it's also about me being holier than everyone else, right? I'm going to separate myself out, I'm going to put myself in this very holy place and not get involved in these worldly pursuits that everybody else does. So it's actually, in a way, the opposite of the Mishnah. In a way, it's interesting, it's juxtaposed with the Porish Atzmo Midarchei Hatzibur, right? There's the person who was Porish Atzmo Midarchei Hatzibur because he was indulging when everybody else was suffering and starving, but you could also be parish midachet tzibur in the reverse. You're going to deny yourself when everybody else is living a normal life. So you could say that that's lovely and that's holy and you're trying to achieve, but you could also say, no, there's an intrinsic problem there, because the whole theme here is about the Yechidim caring about the tzibur. They're praying for the tzibur before the tzibur even prays for itself. They're mishtatev, right, to separate and make yourself holier than the tzibur. So I think that there's a double critique in what Shmuel is saying. A, the idea of asceticism itself being a religious practice, and B, the way in which that's a paresh minat tzibur. Of course, you have the other strand here in Rabbi Linzer. Okay, there was a comment. Yeah.
Just 2 comments on Shmuel's statement. I understand Yoshe for Taanit is someone who is constantly or regularly
Right.
Not just
Right, and that's the way I was sort of describing it as well. It's not like a one-time type of a thing, right?
And also, the Gemara could have understood this. Clearly, it does not. It could have understood this, especially in the context of the public-private contrast that we just saw, as someone who is fasting is seen as a sinner. Why are you fasting?
Oh, nikra.
You must have done something wrong.
Oh, that's interesting. And that goes also to the word of nikra, like how he's perceived or called. Interesting. So do you want to say?
There's a similar discussion in Nedarim about it.
The Gemara, this thing repeats itself, clearly. But I do think it's very powerful the way it's being used here, if you think about it as the mirror image of the earlier discussion. And also what different meaning of the fast is, right? Fasting in the context of a communal need and, a communal outcry is one thing. Fasting in a sense of a self-centered religious striving is maybe a very different type of a thing. Yeah.
You said that the emphasis here is not on the Shuva aspect.
Right.
But isn't Shuva also working on our relationship with Hashem?
Yeah, but it's in a different way, I mean, it's, yes, but the point is, that's not what's being focused. Meaning, I think a normal approach is that, sin separates us from God and we have to fix the sin in order to go back to God, right? But then there's also the idea of maybe we don't even know what's separating us from God. We just know God isn't answering, right? And we have to just really, really try to reach out and to call out or whatever, So it's like somebody is trying, somebody isn't returning, a spouse or a girlfriend or a boyfriend isn't returning the phone calls, right? How much is it I'm sorry for whatever I did wrong? or how much is it just to try to restore the connection, So I think that's the issue here. All right. So the Gemara says like this. Go ahead. Okay. So. We just did that. Okay, Umiyama Rabbi Linzer Hachi. Rabbi Linzer really say that this person is holy. V'hama Rabbi Linzer la'olam yimod adam la'atzmo ki'ilu. Interesting phrase. The person should measure himself, should see himself. Ki'ilu kadosh sharui b'toch me'av. Like the holy is in his stomach. Like talk about this idea of about B'tselem Elokim. Like God is in you, and the point being that to deny yourself food is to sort of deny, not take care of your religious responsibilities to your body, to yourself. I mean, it's even more graphic than that. God is the holy is in your stomach. Kadosh in your very essence, in your very midst is the holy. So obviously you have to take care and feed yourself and shouldn't be denying yourself, right? By the way, there is that aspect of that, I should say. Part of the whole question of asceticism as a religious value does have to do with this question of a dualism, right? The difference between the physical and the spiritual. And if you see those things as separate and as competing, then you want to separate yourself from the physical so you can be more spiritual, right? If you see them as much more integrated, right? Human beings are created b'tselem Elokim, and if you read that in a physical way as well, that's another very, again, we try to avoid that type of a reading because of the associating of the physical with God. But anyway, then it leads to a very non-ascetic approach. Your body is holy. You have to take care of your body. So here you see him saying the opposite. So the Gemara says, Lo kasha, hadamati litzurei nafshe, hadalomati litzurei nafshe. It depends on whether you're up to it. If your body can handle it, then it would be a holy thing. But if you're actually damaging your body in the process, then it's a not holy thing. So that obviously tips the scales in favor of the asceticism, assuming you can manage it, which goes against the, I think, deeper theological point of ki'ilu kadosh sharui b'toch me'av. Reish Lakish Amar Nikra Chasid. Reish Lakish says he. Now, who is the he here? Presumably, it's the one that fasts. But let's read the pasuk, and then I'll tell you a different girsa. He's called holy. Shene'amar is or Chasid, right? Righteous. I don't know how to translate it. It's pious, I think would be the best one. Shene'amar Gomel Nafsho Ish Chesed. What's the last word here? Something. What? Achzari. So now it's a very strange pasuk, because literally pasuk is one who takes care of his soul, but could also mean his body, right? So is a pious man. And one who denies his flesh is cruel. So what does that mean that you're supposed to do? Be an ascetic. So where do you get that from it? So Rabbeinu Hananel, and actually Tosas as well, has a different girsa. The girsa is that somebody who is called a chassid is somebody who is not yoshev b'tanit. Their girsa is kol hamonea atzmo mina ta'anit nikra chassid, saying the exact opposite. It is pious to take care of yourself and not to actually be in a ta'anit. Amar Rav Sheshes. Hi, Barbe Rav Diasi B'Ta'anisa. If you have a Torah student that is sitting in a Tanis, Lechol Kabel Sheruse, a dog should eat his meal. Meaning, like, he's not doing anybody any good. Like, why? Because, as Gemara will say, well, we'll see. We'll read two more lines. Amar Rabbi Yomi Barava Ein Tanit Tzibur Bebavel Elatisha Bilvad. This is a little incongruous to the current topic. There's no public fast in Bavel except for Tisha B'Av, since Bavel does not need rain. So the whole theme of this Masechet of public fasts for the sake of rain never take place in Bavel. And the only thing you would do in Bavel that would be the severity of a Tanit Tzibur, starting the night before, no sex, no bathing, all of that would only be Tisha B'Av.
So it doesn't mean that you kill fast.
No. But the fasts of this Masechet of rain are not happening in Bavel. Now that has, I don't know what that's doing in the middle. Now we'll get back to the last line, which will sum up our earlier discussion. Amar Reish Lakish, Ein Tamid Chacham Rishai Leishev B'Tanit. This is going back to let a dog eat his food. A Tamid Chacham cannot sit in a Tanit, Mitnei Shemima'ipim Lechet Shamayim, because it comes at the expense of the more important religious pursuit of learning Torah. So this is not saying that is intrinsically not a religious pursuit, but what is it coming at the expense of? There are other religious pursuits which are more important. So again, fascinating question about the value of a Tanit, not in the context of Tanit Tzibur, about Tanit Yachid, but not Yechidim being mitanef for the Tzibur, being mitanef for themselves, and to what degree is that a positive or a negative? Okay, let's end with a tefillah for the Chatufim. Did you send me this?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Okay, so hold on. Let me read this. This is from. Just give me a second here. Okay.
Should we stand?
Sure. If you want to. I have it. Okay. Give me a second. Misha Berach Havaseinu Aram Yitzchak Yaakov Asher Mutziach Yosef Mibor Tachsiyot V'Analu Daniel B'Gov Harayot El HaShomer L'Tzakot Avot V'Imahot HaPotech B'Chol Eid Sha'arei Dimaot Hu Yishmor V'Yashgiach Al HaNe'arim HaChatufim Yaakov Neftali Ben Rachel Devarah Gilad Michael Ben Bat Galim Ayal Ben Iris Teshurah B'To Shar Ne'adarei Amenu V'Tzivotenu Ana Rachum L'Chanun Shomer Yisrael Asher Lo Yanu V'Lo Yishan Totiyem Yitzara L'Yavracha Me'afela L'Aram Yishibu L'Gula V'Tachsivem L'Chet Avotehem V'Imotehem B'Vriyut V'Shalom B'Zchut Avotenu Toshia B'Banenu V'Kuyam B'Hem Masha Katuv Hotzia Mimasker Nafshi L'Hodot Et Shemecha Hashta B'Gala V'Zman Karev V'Nomar Amen.
Amen.
The Tanit Tzibur